What's up, guys? My name is Murph, and today I'm going to be bringing you a Frostfire Frostmage guide for Mythic Plus in Season 3 of the War Within patch 11.2. A little bit of background on myself before we get into the video. I'm a former rank 1 parsing, cutting edge Mythic Raider turned Mythic Plus enjoyer. We ended the season last season in Season 2 of the War Within, just shy of 3600 IO as a Frostmage, and we almost parsed a perfect 100 across the board in all of the 8 Season 2 Mythic Plus dungeons. Today's video is going to be a little bit more of a beginner-friendly Frostmage guide. We're going to be going over the core mechanics and gameplay of a Frostmage. We'll cover rotation, we'll cover stats, we'll cover talents, and at the very end of the video, I'm going to give you guys some tips and tricks to help you guys optimize and pump out as much damage as you possibly can as a Frostmage. So with that said, sit back and enjoy the video. Okay, so let's go over the core gameplay mechanics of a Frostmage. So getting started as a Frostmage, your entire gameplay loop is going to be revolving around this key talent right here called Shatter, which multiplies the critical strike chance of your spells against frozen targets by 1.5, and then adds an additional 50% critical strike chance on top of that. So if we take my character's current critical strike rating, which is a 27%, pull up a calculator real quick, we'll go ahead and pop 27 in there. We're going to multiply this by 1.5, which is going to shoot out 40.5%. On top of that, we add an additional 50, which is going to shoot out 90.5% chance for me to crit against frozen targets. Now, there is a point with critical strike where you will reach 100% chance to critically strike against frozen targets. That is going to be if you have a critical strike chance of 33.33% chance to crit. So if we pop that into the calculator real quick, 33.33, multiply that by 1.5, that's going to give us 49.995% chance to crit. Again, we add an additional 50% on top of that due to Shatter, and it's going to give us a 99.995% chance to critically strike against frozen targets, which is essentially 100% chance to critically strike. So you don't want to go beyond 33.33% critical strike as a Frostmage. We'll get more into this during the stats portion of this video, but that's just something to keep in mind, where Shatter, again, is going to massively increase your chance to critically strike against frozen targets. Okay, and next up, we have another core mechanic called Winter's Chill, which is going to mainly be applied by your Flurry ability. So Flurry shoots out a Flurry of Ice, which strikes 3 total times. Every hit of Flurry is going to apply a debuff on the target called Winter's Chill, which stacks up to 2 times. And Winter's Chill will make it so the target takes damage from your spells as if they were frozen. So this is really nice against bosses or lieutenant mobs or enemies that can't be naturally frozen via means like an Ice Nova or a Frost Nova or your pet's freeze ability. So you're going to be able to apply a debuff to the target, which is then going to cause your next couple of spells to benefit from Shatter. In AoE, there is another way to apply Winter's Chill to multiple enemies, and that is going to be through this talent called Cold as Snap. So what this does is it's going to turn your Cold of Cold into a big AoE cooldown. It's going to give it a 45-second cooldown, but if Cone of Cold hits 3 or more enemies, it's going to reset the cooldown of your Frozen Orb, your Comet Storm, and in addition, Cone of Cold will apply Winter's Chill to all enemies hit. So this is a way to apply an AoE Shatter effect to every target that you hit with Cone of Cold, given that you hit 3 or more enemies. This is going to come into play during the rotational part of this video, where you are able to shatter huge AoE burst on big groups of enemies via Winter's Chill. So to get started, this is going to be your general default loadout that you're probably going to want to use in the majority of your dungeons. So feel free to pause the video here, take a look at the talents that we're running. I'm also going to provide an import string down below in the description of this video if you guys want to copy paste it. Pop it into your own talent tree to copy the loadout that we're going to be looking at here today. So again, in most dungeons, you're going to want to be running this loadout that we have here. We're going to be starting on the left-hand side of the tree here on the mage side of the tree. So again, pretty default, you're going to see this exact loadout on a majority of builds that you look up online. However, there is one caveat to this where depending on what dungeon you're doing, you might not need a spell steal and you might not need a decurse. So as you're playing these dungeons and learning them, try and make a note of which mobs in which dungeons have abilities that you can spell steal or which mobs put out curses that you can remove from your allies. If you're doing a dungeon that doesn't require one of these or both of these, you can feel free to pop these talent points out and maybe think about putting them into something a little bit more defensive or something that provides you a little bit more utility. Like maybe pop these points into Tempest Barrier, which gives you an absorb shield after you blink. However, again, just make note that there are certain dungeons that have really nice buffs that you can spell steal. And also, you're one of the only few classes in the game that can remove curses. So again, this is something you're going to want to keep in mind. In regards to spell steal, think about mobs like the Templar mobs in Priory of the Sacred Flame. After the first boss, when you go up into the Cathedral, the Templars will cast an Avenging Wrath like ability. It's basically a Paladin Wings, and it's about an 8 to 10 second buff that gives them, it's either 20 or 30% increased damage that you can spell steal as a mage. So when running Priory, I always make sure I have spell steal, and I always try to steal that buff from the Templars. It's going to make your damage look quite insane on the meters. So that's something that you're going to want to keep in mind. Again, the rest of the tree is pretty bog standard. There are a couple of things that you want to make note of. Blast Wave, this is one of our main stops to interrupt mobs. It's not a kick, but it will cancel casts for, just a second or two, referred to as a stop. So Blast Wave, you're going to want to get used to using this button. Also down here in the center of the tree, you do have the option between Dragon's Breath and Supernova. Again, these are two more stop abilities, which basically function almost identically. However, Supernova is a ranged ability that will knock enemies up into the air. Dragon's Breath is a frontal cone ability, which requires you to be up in melee range to effectively hit, but it's going to disorient anything that you hit. So honestly, in this node, I would recommend, play with both, figure out which one you like more. Generally, I like to opt towards Supernova because it doesn't require me to run up into melee range to hit the Dragon's Breath. So again, figure out which one you like best and feel free to use whichever one you like here. Okay, and moving over to the Frost side of the talent tree. Again, this is going to be a pretty standard Frost Mage build that you're going to see in most builds online. Unfortunately, as a Frost Mage, we don't really have a lot of choices in what we play, especially when it comes to Mythic Plus. There is one variant of this talent tree loadout that you can run that we will go over in just a second. But this default build is going to be centered around this bottom left talent down here called Death's Chill. Now, what this does is whenever you use Icy Veins, it's going to give you Death's Chill, where whenever you cast Frostfire Bolt, you're going to be gaining a stacking spell power increase up to 15 times. So Death's Chill, you're going to want to ramp this up before you start doing your AoE Burst. It is a little bit more involved, a little bit more to think about. There's a lot more setup to play this talent loadout effectively, which we will get into in the rotation part of this video. However, there is a simpler version of this talent tree where less to think about, a little bit more passive, where you can pop a point out of Death's Chill and pop a point out of Fractured Frost and put one into Splintering Cold to get 2 out of 2, and then pop another point into Chain Reaction. Chain Reaction is basically just a stacking buff to your Ice Lance whenever you use Ice Lance against a frozen target. So if you're able to maintain this buff, your Ice Lance is just going to be doing more damage. Again, it's a more passive, more safe choice here that you are free to experiment with and find which one suits you best. One thing to make note of with Death's Chill is that in lower level keys, I find that by the time I've stacked my Death's Chill up to a suitable level, about 12 to 15 stacks, again, in lower level keys, a lot of mobs don't have a lot of health, and by the time that I'm ready to start bursting and I have Death's Chill fully stacked up, the mobs are essentially almost dead, if not already dying, which can feel pretty bad. So definitely in lower level keys, you might want to think about just playing the Chain Reaction build just as a more passive option so that you don't have to hold on to your burst until the whole pack is already dead. However, in higher level keys, when mobs live longer and they have more health, Death's Chill is going to give you way more burst damage, and it's going to be way more reliable for your overall damage. So that's just something that you're going to want to keep in mind. Okay, and last but not least, let's go over the Frostfire tree real quick. So Frostfire is pretty passive. A lot of the stuff in here are just passive procs and passive things that happen from pressing your abilities that you already use in your core rotation. Two main buffs that you're going to want to track and be aware of are going to be Excess Fire and Excess Frost. So Excess Fire says, casting Comet Storm causes your next Ice Lance to explode in a Frostfire Burst, dealing a moderate amount of damage in AoE. Frostfire Burst has a 50% chance to grant you a Brain Freeze. So anytime that you consume Excess Fire, you have a 50% chance to get a Brain Freeze. This is going to feed into Excess Frost, where When you consume excess fire, this is going to cause your next flurry that you use to cast an Ice Nova at 150% effectiveness. And this will also consume the excess frost to reduce the cooldown of your Comet Storm by 3 seconds. Comet Storm is where a large portion of your damage is going to be coming from in both single target and in AoE. So having any cooldown reduction on Comet Storm is just going to lead to more damage for you throughout the course of a key. This is because we have another talent here in the Frostfire tree called Isothermic Core, where whenever we use Comet Storm, we're going to call down a meteor at 150% effectiveness. So every time we Comet Storm, we're also going to be calling down a meteor. Basically, just think of it as extra damage pushed into your Comet Storm button. One other thing that you want to make note of is Frostfire Empowerment. You have a chance when you're casting spells to gain Frostfire Empowerment, which is going to cause your next Frostfire Bolt to be an instant cast spell. It's going to deal 60% increased damage, and it will explode for 80% of its damage to nearby targets. So again, the main things you want to track and be aware of are excess fire, excess frost, and in turn, Frostfire Empowerment. With all of these combined, this is going to just enhance your passive Frost gameplay. There isn't too much that you need to think about in regards to Frostfire outside of this. Most of this is just passive damage that you're going to be gaining from doing your basic rotation. All right, for stats, you are going to want Intellect as your primary stat. Secondary stats, the priority is going to go Haste into Critical Strike into Versatility. Follow that up with Mastery. Again, one thing to keep in mind is that Critical Strike has a soft cap at 33.33%. So anything beyond that is going to have a lot less value to your character. So you don't want to primarily focus on getting to 33.33% crit. You want to get as close as feasibly possible to that number without neglecting your other stats. So even though Frostmage Mastery did get buffed by a flat 40% in value this patch, unfortunately, our Mastery does not benefit a lot of our big damage sources, primarily those that come from our Frostfire hero talent tree. As you can see, Mastery benefits a lot of our spells. However, when you look at your overall breakdown over the course of a dungeon, you'll see things like Meteor and Ignite from our tier set, Frostfire Empowerment, Frostfire Burst. None of these are gaining any benefit from our Mastery. Even though it's a stat that you don't want to completely ignore, Versatility is going to increase all of your damage, including all of the damage sources that come from our hero talents. With that said, I highly recommend that you guys sim your own characters to find out what stats and what gear are best for you. This stat priority might change a little bit depending on what current gear your character is wearing. You might want more Mastery, you might want more Versatility. Definitely go and sim your character to figure out what's best for you. So let's get into the actual gameplay and rotation of a Frost Mage. So again, with everything we covered earlier in regards to Shatter and Winter's Chill, on top of that, we're going to be generating procs called Fingers of Frost and Brain Freeze. What Fingers of Frost does, we'll see if we can't generate a couple here, is it's going to cause your next Ice Lance to hit the target as if they were frozen. So as you can see here on the left and right hand side of my character, you can see I have 2 stacks of Fingers of Frost. So when I use Ice Lance, it's going to consume one of those, and my Ice Lance is going to benefit from Shatter since Fingers of Frost is causing it to act as if the target was frozen. Brain Freeze, this proc up here, which unfortunately is about to expire, is going to refund us a charge of Flurry, and it's going to cause your next Flurry to hit harder. So essentially, as you're casting spells, specifically through Frostfire Bolt, you're going to be generating your procs of Flurry and Fingers of Frost. And so one thing that you want to keep in mind with Frost is try not to overcap on procs. You want to avoid munching procs as much as possible. And so what that means is munching procs means if I have, 2 stacks of Fingers of Frost right now, and if I'm not using these and I'm casting Frostfire Bolts or I'm throwing my Frozen Orb out, any additional procs that I might get are going to waste because I can only have a maximum of 2 Fingers of Frost and 1 Brain Freeze. So you want to try to keep that in mind. You want to be trying to use your procs as efficiently as possible so that you're not overcapping and munching on potential damage. Now, another core thing with Frost Mage, especially this season because our tier set bonus plays heavily into this spell, is Glacial Spike. Now, think of this as a Chaos Bolt for a mage. Now, when we have 5 icicles, this allows us to cast Glacial Spike. So how do we generate icicles? Well, you generate icicles by casting Frostfire Bolt, Flurry, and Ice Lances against frozen targets. Once you get up to 5 Icicles, your Glacial Spike button will light up, and it will allow you to cast a spell. Now, Glacial Spike is our hardest hitting ability by far, so you absolutely want to ensure that you are forcing Glacial Spike to benefit from Shatter pretty much every single time you cast it. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can do this. The main way that you'd want to do this is when you have 5 Icicles, you hard cast your Glacial Spike, and at the very tail end of the cast, you're going to want to hit a Flurry. What happens here is Flurry shoots off first and hits the target, applying our Winter's Chill debuff. Glacial Spike is then going to hit the target, and then Flurry is going to apply 2 more stacks of Winter's Chill. The reason it works this way is that Flurry's projectile speed is just slightly faster than Glacial Spike's. And again, keep in mind, Flurry has 3 projectiles, so the first projectile of your Flurry is going to hit the target and apply Winter's Chill. Next, your Glacial Spike is going to hit the target. It's going to consume that Winter's Chill. And then Flurry has 2 more projectiles that are going to hit after Glacial Spike, which reapply Winter's Chill, causing it to stack up to 2. So essentially, you can get 3 spells to benefit from 1 cast of Flurry. Now, what you can also do is if you already have Winter's Chill on the target and you have 5 Icicles, you don't want to use Flurry to waste a charge since I already have Winter's Chill. You want to send the Glacial Spike into the target without using Flurry because Winter's Chill is already applied to the target. So again, you want to shatter your Glacial Spike as much as you can. Another thing that you can do, let me generate 1 more stack of Flurry real quick. In 2 target situations, what you can also do is use Flurry on 1 target, use Flurry on another target, and use Glacial Spike because it's going to cleave thanks to our Splitting Ice talent and hit both targets benefiting from Shatter because they both had Winter's Chill applied to them. Okay, so in single target, we are going to want to, again, build as many Icicles as we can as fast as possible because we want to get out as many Glacial Spike casts as we possibly can. So what our opener is going to look like on a single target is you're going to open up with a Frostfire Bolt, cue a Flurry, so that the Frostfire Bolt will benefit from the first projectile of Flurry. While both of those are in midair, you want to activate your Icy Veins and cast Comet Storm. Comet Storm has a great interaction with Winter's Chill where it benefits from Winter's Chill and shattering, but it does not consume the Winter's Chill. So every hit from the Comet Storm and the meteor that you're going to be spawning from your Frostfire hero talent tree are going to benefit from shatter, but not consume it. So you want to use Comet Storm always into a Winter's Chill or when you're able to freeze enemies. And again, you can do that with Ice Nova or Frost Nova if you need to in AoE. So again, our opener is going to be a Frostfire Bolt, cue a Flurry into an Icy Veins Comet Storm. And from here, we're going to be wanting to generate up to 5 Icicles. And we want to shatter our Glacial Spike as often as we can. I pretty much do not cast Glacial Spike unless I know that it's going to be able to shatter the target. So again, core rotation here is, generate procs and use your spells accordingly. Comet Storm, benefiting from Winter's Chill. It's not going to consume it. As you can see here, we still have 2 stacks of Winter's Chill on the target. And again, from here, it's all about generating up to 5 Icicles and shooting off your juicy, beefy Glacials. In single target, you want to treat Death's Chill basically as a passive. You do not want to focus on trying to stack up the spell power bonus. If you happen to have to cast Frostfire Bolts or you get instant cast Frostfire Bolts, send them off, but treat this as a complete passive. So one thing to keep in mind is while we're doing our rotation, we are going to be generating excess fire and excess frost through our hero talent tree. So we generate excess fire by using Comet Storm, which calls down a meteor, and we consume excess fire by using Ice Lance. Now what this is going to do is it's going to proc AoE damage on the target, and it has a 50% chance to give me a Brain Freeze proc, which is going to refund a stack of Flurry. Unfortunately, we didn't get it there. However, when you consume excess fire with that Ice Lance, you're going to get excess frost. When you use Flurry, it's going to consume excess frost to reduce the cooldown of your Comet Storm. So you want to track both of these buffs to ensure that you are keeping as much cooldown reduction uptime going for your Comet Storm as possible. Also note that instant cast Frostfire Bolts from Frostfire Empowerment are also going to grant you both excess frost and excess fire. Like we were saying earlier, when you use Comet Storm against a target that has Winter's Chill, It is going to benefit from Winter's Chill, but it is not going to consume it. So when you look at your overall damage at the end of a key, your Comet Storm, especially your Meteor, are going to be a high percentage of your overall damage. Now let's discuss our AoE rotation and burst AoE rotation. So there's a couple main components that come into play with our AoE. So primarily at a basic level, we are going to want to have the talents Ice Caller, which reads every time Blizzard deals damage, the cooldown of Frozen Orb is reduced by 0.5 seconds. What this means is you want to have Blizzard up as often as possible with as much uptime as you can, hitting as many mobs all at once to get the most cooldown reduction that you can possibly get on your Frozen Orb. Next up, we take Freezing Rain, which reads Frozen Orb makes Blizzard instant cast and increases its damage done by 60% for 12 seconds. So Frozen Orb and Blizzard both play into each other. Blizzard is going to be reducing the cooldown of Frozen Orb, and Frozen Orb is going to be allowing you to cast Blizzard instantly with increased damage. Let's discuss the burst AoE rotation. So again, this is under the assumption that you are going to be playing with the Death's Chill talent loadout that we were discussing earlier. Again, this reads while Icy Veins is active, damaging an enemy with Frostbolt or Frostfire Bolt increases spell damage by 1%. This stacks up to 15 times. So on top of Death's Chill, we play with Fractured Frost, where while Icy Veins is active, your Frostbolts also hit an additional 2 targets with increased damage. So instead of every one Frostfire Bolt giving us 1% spell power, every Frostfire Bolt cast is going to give us up to 3% bonus spell power. So we have a way to reliably and quickly stack up a very significant spell power bonus. On top of that, the other component of our burst damage comes into play with Coldest Snap. What this talent does is it increases Cone of Cold's cooldown to 45 seconds, and if 3 or more enemies are hit, it's going to reset your cooldown of Frozen Orb and Comet Storm, but more importantly, it applies Winter's Chill to everything that it hits. So essentially what all this means is in AoE, we want to focus on building up our Death's Chill as fast as we can so that we can get the most damage out of our Cone of Cold reset windows. So what the AoE burst rotation will look like is you'll start by shooting out a Frozen Orb, you'll drop a Blizzard and use Icy Veins. From here, you want to cast at minimum 4 Frostfire Bolts, given that they're able to cleave, so we get up to 12 stacks of Death's Chill. You want to use a Comet Storm into a Cone of Cold to reset your cooldowns. Use an Orb, Comet Storm, and another Blizzard. You want to keep Blizzard on cooldown. And from here, you can just use your normal rotation, throw out your procs, build up to 5 Icicles, and shoot out Glacial Spikes, rinse and repeat. Also, keep in mind your stacks of excess frost. Again, if you want to just shoot flurries out, you can reset the cooldown of your Comet Storm very quickly, and you keep the rotation going. You know, fit in a shifting power there to reset your Frozen Orb cooldown, and from here, you just keep going. Now, let's quickly talk about Shifting Power. So Shifting Power is a returning ability from Shadowlands, where it's on a 1-minute cooldown, and while you channel this ability, your Mage ability cooldowns are reduced by 12 seconds. So the main abilities that we're going to want to be reducing the cooldown of is Icy Veins, Comet Storm, and Frozen Orb. So if we throw out Frozen Orb, we use Icy Veins, and we use Comet Storm just to put them all on cooldown, you want to use Shifting Power to reduce these 3 cooldowns. However, if any of these have less than 10 seconds remaining on their cooldown, you do not want to use Shifting Power. When you use Shifting Power, you want to ensure that all of these have 10 or more seconds remaining to get the full value out of every Shifting Power cast, which is going to, again, just feed into you being able to use your main damaging buttons faster. You'll also want to be mindful of your positioning when you are shooting out a Frozen Orb. So Frozen Orb has a minimum distance that it will always travel no matter what, even if you're right next to the target, because Frozen Orb, when it first hits an enemy, it will slow down on its path. It will continue moving just at a slower rate. However, there is a minimum distance that it has to travel before it can slow down. So if you're too close to a target and you use Frozen Orb, it's going to launch out behind the target and very quickly get out of range of doing damage to this target. So you want to keep in mind that when using Frozen Orb, you want to cast it so that the farthest edge away from you of the Frozen Orb hits the target first, so that it has the longest time to travel through the target. So as you can see, now we got some distance from the target. If I'm to throw out a Frozen Orb, the very farthest edge of my Frozen Orb is going to hit the target immediately. and the orb is going to slow down and travel the entire distance through the target, which is just increasing the uptime and the damage that you get out of your orb. So as you can see, my orb has a much longer path to travel through the targets before it gets out of range or despawns. Another thing in regards to positioning, if you are too close to a target when you cast your Glacial Spike Flurry combo, the Flurry will not hit before the Glacial Spike does. The range is pretty short, but if you are right up next to the target and you are going to cast a Glacial Spike, let's build up icicles real quick so I can demonstrate what I'm talking about. If you are right on the enemy's ass right here, and you are to cast a Glacial Spike into a Flurry, there's a high likelihood that the Glacial Spike is going to land before the Flurry, and it won't benefit from Shatter. So if you are really, really close to the enemy and you are trying to shatter your Glacial with a Flurry combo after the Glacial is going off, you want to make sure you're at least a couple steps back. So we'll do it one more time. We'll build up to our Glacial Spike. You see there's about 4 or 5 yards in between me and the target. We'll use a Glacial Spike into a Flurry, and as you can see there, it crits benefiting from Shatter. So you want to make sure that you aren't standing too close to the target when you're trying to get your Glacial Spike Shatter combos off. So a little tip that you can use in AoE when you don't have any procs, if you don't have any Flurry casts, if you don't have enough icicles to cast a Glacial Spike, if you have your Frozen Orb out and your Blizzard down, if you run into melee range and you Frost Nova, the Frost Nova is only going to last for about a second. But what this does is it freezes the enemies and it causes your spells to benefit from Shatter. You can also do this with Ice Nova. So this is just something that you want to keep in mind, where you can squeeze out just a little bit of extra damage from your character in AoE. And so since we can see that Shatter is benefiting all of our mage abilities, there is some other little things that you can do to squeeze out potential damage. If you're going for a shifting power, if the target has Winter's Chill on them, your shifting power is also going to benefit from Shatter. And now this isn't a massive DPS increase by any means, but spells critting versus not critting, you know, we'll take that any day. To be fair, you do need to be in melee range for this one to work, but it's just another little tip that you can use to squeeze out just a little bit more damage. So let's go over some of our defensive and utility spells. So the most basic defensive spell that we have that we are going to basically be using on cooldown to not only help ourselves live, but to help our healer friends out is Ice Barrier. This is a 25-second cooldown. It's just going to give you a big ol' shield, which thanks to our Frostfire hero talent tree is also going to give us Blazing Barrier, which just grants additional absorb as well on top of that. So again, short cooldown, you want to use this pretty much as frequently as possible. Moving on, we have Ice Cold, which is a replacement for Ice Block, which is normally our immunity spell. However, when you're sitting in an Ice Block, you can't cast spells, you can't move, you're kind of just stuck there. So Ice Cold turns your Ice Block into a massive 70% damage reduction for 6 seconds. Just keep in mind that this is also going to give you hypothermia just like Ice Block does, where you can't reuse this spell again for 30 seconds. The reason that's important is because Cold Snap is going to completely reset the cooldown of a lot of your spells, including Ice Cold. So you can't Ice Cold, Cold Snap, Ice Cold. There is a 30-second window in between being able to use Ice Cold back to back. So again, just something to think about. Next up, we have mirror images. So what this does is it creates 3 copies of you, and this is going to reduce all damage that you take by 20% while the mirror images are active. Any direct hit that you take is going to cause one of your mirror images to dissipate. However, more importantly with mirror images, while you have these down, this makes you unable to generate or rip aggro on enemies. This basically makes it so you are generating no threat towards yourself. So in big AoE burst situations, mirror image is really good to ensure that you don't rip aggro off the tank. Now, I feel like this is more suited towards Arcane with its insane burst. Frost doesn't have as insane single target, nuke damage as Arcane does. So oftentimes I do find myself just using mirror images for the pure 20% damage reduction. However, again, if you feel like threat might be an issue or you don't want to pull aggro, definitely think about using mirror images in conjunction with your burst damage. All right, and next up, we have one of my favorite defensives in the entire game in the form of Greater Invisibility, which is an instant cast spell. Makes you invisible and untargetable for 20 seconds while removing all threat. However, any action that you take whether you cast a spell or you take damage, is going to pull you out of invisibility. But while you're invisible, you take 60% reduced damage and for 3 seconds after reappearing. So there's two ways that I like to use Greater Invis. One, obviously, to drop threat. If for whatever reason, I have aggro on a boss, or if the tank dies, I can go invisible and it will clear all my threat. Or if for whatever reason I rip aggro. Also, if you're getting cast at by a certain mob or multiple mobs at the same time, if you greater invisibility before their cast finishes, it will cancel their cast. And they'll either target somebody else with it, or their cast just won't go off. Another thing that you can do is if you know a big damage instance is about to come in, you can pre-greater invis, because again, while you're invisible and for 3 seconds afterwards, you're taking 60% reduced damage, and you can use that to your benefit to massively reduce an incoming source of damage that you know is coming. Last but not least, we have Alter Time. This actually used to be a DPS cooldown back in the day in Mists of Pandaria when this was first introduced to the game, but it was pretty complex to use. It would reset all of your procs, all of your trinkets, all of your buffs. And over the years, they turned it into pretty much a purely defensive cooldown. And what this does is when you activate Alter Time, it's going to place a copy of your character in the exact position that you were in when you press this button with your exact same health percentage. What this means is you want to use Alter Time when you have a high amount of health before big damage comes in, so that you can Alter Time back to full health. If you Alter Time while you're at low HP, and in the time before you alter back, your healer heals you up, they're going to notice when you immediately shoot back down to a low health percentage. So again, you want to try and use Alter Time when you're at a high percentage of health. Again, Alter Time is going to create an image of you where you were, and when you use Alter Time, it's going to immediately pull you back. So you can use this to your advantage positionally, but again, primarily you want to focus on using this to keep yourself alive. All right, guys, so that's going to wrap up our video for today. Again, this was more of a beginner level entry FrostMage guide, kind of going over the basics. But if this video does well, I am open to making more guides that go more in depth and get more technical, as well as maybe doing guides for Fire, Arcane, and maybe even some other classes. So if you guys would like to see more, definitely let me know in the comments down below. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.